The morning air was cool and quiet, the kind that makes people wrap their jackets a little tighter and hurry toward where they need to be. The guard stood at his post by the tall iron gate, watching the world begin its slow movement. He had been working there for years, long enough to know most faces that passed by. The office workers, the janitors, the delivery men, everyone moved with purpose. To him it was another ordinary day, another shift to complete. He enjoyed the calm of the early hours before the real rush began. The street lamps were still fading, and the sun had just started to stretch its light over the road. A small smile often found its way to his face when people greeted him politely. He believed in treating everyone with respect, no matter who they were. It wasn't part of his job description, but it made the long days easier. One morning, he noticed an old man walking slowly along the sidewalk. The man was thin, wearing a long coat that looked older than him, and he leaned heavily on a wooden cane. His steps were slow, careful, as if each one required thought. When he reached the gate, he gave a faint nod to the guard. His lips curved in a gentle smile before he continued toward the garden area behind the building. The guard nodded back. There was something peaceful about the old man, something that made him stand out among the hurried crowd. Still, the guard didn't think much of it. People came and went all the time. Maybe the man had an appointment in one of the offices. Maybe he just liked walking. Whatever it wasn't his business. He had a job to do, keep the place secure, stay alert, and greet people with kindness. The next day, the same thing happened. The old man appeared again, right around the same time, moving at that same steady pace. He nodded at the guard, gave a soft smile, and went inside. This time, the guard's curiosity grew. It wasn't common for someone of that age to walk alone every day. But he didn't ask questions. It wasn't his place to pry. Days passed. The old man became part of the guard's routine, like the rising sun or the sound of the traffic at the corner. Every morning, right on time, the old man would come by. And every morning he would give that polite smile, say nothing, and continue on his way. Sometimes the guard would hold the door open for him. Other times he would help him steady himself if the wind was strong. Each time the old man would thank him with a quiet nod. There was something about those small moments that stayed with the guard. Maybe it was because, in a job that often felt thankless, those tiny interactions reminded him that people still noticed the small things. He didn't know the old man's name or where he came from, but he found himself looking forward to seeing him each morning. It brought a bit of warmth to his routine. One particularly cold morning, the old man arrived later than usual. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the cane. The guard stepped forward, concern showing in his face. "Are you all right, sir?" he asked gently. The old man gave a weak smile. "Just a little slower today," he replied softly. "Take your time," the guard said, opening the gate for him. "No rush." The old man nodded, his eyes kind but tired. "Thank you, son." It wasn't much of a conversation, but for some reason those two simple words, "thank you," stuck with the guard for the rest of the day. There was something genuine in the old man's voice, something that made it feel more than just politeness. The weeks went on like that. The old man would arrive every morning, walk through the gate, spend some time in the garden area, then leave quietly. The guard noticed how he would always pause near a certain spot under a large tree before turning back. Sometimes he would sit on the bench there, looking at something only he could see. The guard often wondered what thoughts filled that old man's mind as he sat there alone. One day it began to rain heavily. The guard stood under his small shelter, watching people rush past with umbrellas and jackets pulled tight. Then he saw the familiar figure of the old man coming down the road, holding a small, worn-out umbrella that barely covered him. Without thinking twice, the guard grabbed his own larger umbrella and stepped out into the rain. "Sir, here," he said, holding it out. "You'll get soaked." The old man looked surprised. "You'll get wet," he said in that calm, shaky voice. "It's fine," the guard smiled. "I'm used to it." For a moment, they both stood there, rain tapping softly on the umbrella. The old man's eyes glistened, not from the rain, but from something deeper. "You're very kind," he said quietly. The guard shrugged, just doing what anyone would do. But deep down, he knew not everyone would have. The world was often too busy to notice small things anymore. Yet something about the old man made him care, made him want to help. When the rain eased, the old man handed back the umbrella with both hands, as if it were something precious. "Thank you again," he said. "You have no idea what this means." The guard simply nodded, not realizing that those words carried a weight far greater than he understood. As time went by, their silent routine continued. The old man would come, they would exchange a smile or a few words, and life went on. The guard never asked about his family or why he came every day. He figured the man had his own reasons and it wasn't his place to question them. Still, he couldn't help but feel a quiet respect for the old man's dedication. No matter how cold or windy it got, he always showed up. Sometimes, as the guard watched him disappear into the garden, he thought about his own life. His job was simple but lonely at times. People passed by without seeing him. They were too caught up in their phones or their thoughts. The old man, though, he saw him. Every morning, that small nod was more than just a greeting. It was a reminder that he mattered, that someone noticed he was there. There was one morning, though, that stood out. The old man came slower than ever before, his steps unsteady. The guard rushed forward, offering his arm to help. The old man accepted it with a grateful smile. "You're always here," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Always kind," the guard chuckled. "That's my job." The old man looked at him, eyes full of warmth. "No, it's more than a job. You make this place feel alive." The words caught the guard off guard. He didn't know how to respond, so he just smiled and helped the man through the gate. But later that day, as he stood at his post, he thought about those words again. Maybe kindness did make a place feel alive. Maybe small acts mattered more than he realized. That night, as he headed home, the image of the old man walking through the rain stayed in his mind. Something about him, his patience, his quiet strength, reminded the guard of his own father who had passed away years ago. Maybe that was why he cared so much without even noticing it. Every morning after that felt a little different. The guard no longer saw his job as just standing watch. He looked at people differently, realizing that everyone carried their own stories, their own struggles. Some showed it, others hid it well. But the old man, in his gentle silence, had somehow taught him that the smallest kindness could touch someone's heart in ways words never could. And so, without knowing it, the bond between the guard and the old man grew, built not on long talks or grand gestures, but on quiet moments that spoke louder than words ever could. What the guard didn't know then was that these small acts he thought so little of would soon become something unforgettable. The days continued to pass, each one starting the same way. The guard would arrive early, take his position by the gate, and wait for the building to wake up. It had become a habit for him to glance down the road at the same time every morning, expecting to see that familiar figure, an old man walking slowly, cane in hand with that soft smile that seemed to hold a quiet peace. It wasn't part of his duty, but it had become part of his day. The old man always came around the same hour, never late, never too early. The guard started noticing the little things about him. How he paused every few steps to catch his breath. How he always carried a small cloth in his coat pocket to wipe his hands or clean his glasses. How he sometimes hummed softly to himself when he thought no one was listening. There was something gentle about the old man's presence, something that made even the busy mornings feel calmer. One day the weather turned sharply cold. The wind was biting and people hurried past, wrapping scarves around their faces. The guard stood with his hands deep in his pockets, trying to stay warm. When the old man appeared that morning, his steps were slower than usual, and he seemed to shiver from the chill. The guard opened the gate for him and said softly, "You should have stayed home today." "It's freezing." The old man smiled faintly. "I don't like staying home. It makes the day too long," he said. His voice trembled slightly, but there was determination in it. "A little walk helps me feel alive." The guard nodded, admiring his spirit. "All right then," he said kindly. "Just promise me you'll rest a bit before you head back." The old man chuckled quietly. "I will. You sound like my son." That was the first time the guard had heard him mention family. He didn't ask more, but it stayed in his mind. Maybe the man lived alone, maybe not. Either way, he seemed to carry a quiet kind of loneliness, the kind that hides behind polite smiles. Over the next few weeks, their morning exchanges grew a little longer. The old man began to greet him first, and sometimes they shared a few lines of small talk. He would comment on the weather, or talk about how beautiful the trees looked that day. The guard listened with patience and genuine interest. It wasn't that the conversations were deep or important. It was the warmth in them that mattered. One morning, the guard brought an extra cup of tea from the small cafe nearby. When the old man arrived, the guard held it out. "Thought you might like something warm," he said. The old man's eyes lit up. "You didn't have to," he said softly, taking the cup with both hands. "This means a lot," the guard smiled. "It's nothing. Just tea." But the way the old man looked at him made it clear it wasn't just tea. It was kindness, something simple yet powerful. He took a slow sip and closed his eyes for a moment, as if savoring not just the drink but the gesture itself. From that day on, the old man sometimes brought something in return. A small packet of homemade biscuits, a piece of fruit, or a folded napkin that he insisted the guard take. The guard would laugh and say, "You don't have to bring anything, sir." But the old man always replied, "I know, but I want to." It became a quiet exchange between them, unspoken, unplanned, and filled with respect. It wasn't about favors or returning kindness. It was about connection. In a world where most people rushed past each other without a word, these two had found something rare, a few moments of shared humanity. As the days turned into weeks, the guard began to notice how much he looked forward to those brief interactions. On the days when the old man didn't come, he felt an odd emptiness. It surprised him how quickly a stranger could become a part of his routine. Sometimes when things got stressful or dull at work, he found himself thinking about their quiet talks and how the old man's calmness seemed to bring balance to his day. There was one afternoon when the guard saw the old man sitting on the bench near the garden longer than usual. The sun was low and most people had already left for home. Concerned, the guard walked over. "Everything all right?" he asked. The old man looked up and smiled, though his eyes were tired. "Just thinking," he said. "This place holds many memories." The guard nodded, unsure how to respond. "It's a peaceful spot," he said softly. "Yes," the old man replied. "It reminds me of someone I used to sit with a long time ago. She loved gardens." His voice cracked slightly and he looked away for a moment. "It's nice to sit here. Makes me feel like she's still close." The guard didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just stood quietly beside him for a moment, watching the leaves move with the wind. It wasn't his place to ask questions, but somehow, he understood that the old man wasn't just visiting the garden. He was visiting a memory. From then on, the guard treated the old man's visits with even more care. He would make sure the path was clear when he saw him coming. If it rained, he would keep an umbrella ready. If it was too hot, he'd bring a bottle of water. None of it felt like work. It felt right. One particularly windy day, a strong gust blew the old man's hat off. The guard rushed to grab it before it rolled away. When he handed it back, the old man laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that made his eyes sparkle. "You're faster than you look," he said. The guard grinned. "Years of practice, sir." They both laughed together, and in that small moment, the world felt lighter. There was no rush, no worry, no burden. Just two people sharing a simple laugh under the open sky. As days passed, other people began to notice their friendship. Some of the office workers who entered the gate every morning smiled when they saw the guard helping the old man. It became a small, unspoken part of the place's daily life. A few even started greeting the old man themselves. The kindness had quietly spread, just from one man's small gestures. One day, the old man brought something different, a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to the guard and said, "This is a poem I wrote a long time ago. I thought you might like it." The guard opened it carefully. The writing was a bit shaky, but the words were beautiful. The poem was about growing old, about how memories never fade, and how kindness can make the heart feel young again. The guard read it twice before folding it back with care. "It's wonderful," he said sincerely. The old man smiled, pleased. "I'm glad you think so. I don't share it with many people." "Thank you for trusting me with it," the guard said quietly. The old man gave a small nod. "You remind me of my younger self. Always ready to help, always smiling. Never lose that." The guard didn't know how to respond, so he simply smiled. Inside, though, he felt something shift. He didn't think of himself as someone special. He was just doing his job, being polite. But maybe, just maybe, those small things mattered more than he realized. That night, as he locked the gates and looked toward the empty bench under the tree, he thought about the old man's words. He realized how people often underestimate simple kindness. It doesn't take much to make someone feel seen or valued. Sometimes it's just a smile, a cup of tea, or holding a door open. But to someone else, it could mean everything. In the days that followed, the bond between the two men deepened without either of them trying. The guard started to see the old man not just as a visitor, but as a friend, someone who reminded him of what really mattered in life. And though he still didn't know the full story behind the old man's visits, he began to sense there was more to it than just a daily walk. Something deeper, something connected to the past. What neither of them knew was that their small moments of kindness were quietly weaving a story that would soon become unforgettable for both of them. The guards' days began to feel incomplete without seeing the old man. Their morning greetings had become a quiet routine that brought warmth to his otherwise lonely job. But one Monday morning, as the sun came up and people began to arrive, the familiar figure didn't appear. The guard waited, glancing down the road every few minutes, expecting to see that slow but steady walk and that gentle smile. The crowd passed, the hours moved on, but the old man never came. At first, the guard thought maybe the weather had kept him away. It was a little colder than usual, and he figured the old man had decided to rest at home. He'll come tomorrow, he told himself. But the next day came and the old man still didn't show. Then another day passed. And another. By the end of the week, the guard felt something heavy settle in his chest. He tried to push the thought away. Maybe the old man was visiting family, or maybe he had caught a mild flu. Still, the silence felt strange. Every morning, his eyes automatically went to the road, waiting for a face that never appeared. The bench near the garden stood empty, and the path where the old man used to walk looked lonely. The guard didn't realize how much that small presence had meant to him until it was gone. The morning hours felt longer. Even his co-workers noticed he seemed quieter than usual. When someone asked if he was okay, he just nodded and said he was fine. But deep down he felt a strange kind of sadness. He had never known the old man's full story, yet his absence left a gap that words couldn't fill. A week turned into 2. The guard began to worry something might have happened. He considered asking around, but he didn't know where the old man lived or even his full name. The only thing he knew was his kind face and the gentle way he spoke. One evening, as the guard was about to end his shift, he looked toward the garden and whispered quietly, "I hope you're all right, old man." A few more days passed before something unexpected happened. One afternoon, a young woman approached the gate. She looked to be in her early 30s, carrying a small framed photograph in her hands. Her eyes were red and tired, as if she had been crying recently. She hesitated before speaking. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you the guard who works here every morning?" The guard nodded, a little unsure. "Yes, ma'am. Is something wrong?" She took a deep breath, her voice trembling slightly. "Did you know an elderly man who used to come here often?" He walked with a cane and sat by the garden most mornings. The guard felt his heart sink. "Yes, I know who you mean," he said carefully. "I haven't seen him in a while. Is he all right?" The young woman looked down, clutching the photo tighter. "He was my grandfather," she said, her voice breaking. "He passed away 3 weeks ago." For a moment, the guard couldn't find any words. His chest tightened, and the sounds of the busy street around them faded. I'm so sorry," he finally said, his voice low. She gave a small nod, tears welling in her eyes. "He spoke about you often," she continued. "He said there was a kind guard who always helped him, offered him tea, and greeted him every day. He said you were one of the few people who made him feel seen." The guard was stunned. "He'd talked about me?" he asked quietly. The woman nodded. "Yes. He said you reminded him of the kindness people used to show when the world felt slower. He said he always looked forward to seeing you. Even on days when he wasn't feeling well, he'd say, 'I can't miss my walk. My friend at the gate will be waiting.'" Her words hit the guard harder than he expected. He stood still, trying to take it in. All this time he had thought their moments were small, just simple acts of kindness that anyone would have done. But to the old man, they had clearly meant so much more. The woman opened the photo frame and showed it to him. It was a picture of the old man sitting on that same garden bench, smiling softly at the camera. "He loved this place," she said. "He used to say it reminded him of my grandmother." This was where they met a long time ago. She worked in this building when they were young. They used to sit under that tree talking for hours. The guard looked toward the tree in the garden, the same one the old man had often stopped beside. Suddenly everything made sense. The way he always paused there, the quiet way he looked at that spot as if remembering something. "So that's why he came here," the guard whispered. "Yes," she said, wiping her eyes. "After my grandmother passed away, he started visiting again. He said being here helped him feel close to her. It gave him peace." The guard felt a lump form in his throat. He remembered the days when the old man sat there in silence, sometimes smiling, sometimes lost in thought. He remembered holding the umbrella for him, offering him tea, helping him through the gate. He had never realized those moments carried such deep meaning. The woman reached into her bag and pulled out a small folded note. "He asked me to give this to you," she said. "He wrote it a few days before he passed." The guard took the note gently, his hands trembling slightly. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It read, "Thank you for your kindness. You may not know it, but your small acts made my days brighter. You reminded me that there are still good people in the world. For you it may have been nothing, but for me it meant everything." The guard's eyes filled with tears. He didn't know what to say. The woman placed a comforting hand on his arm. "He really appreciated you," she said softly. "You gave him company without even realizing it." The guard nodded, trying to steady his voice. "He was a good man," he said. "I wish I'd told him that," she smiled faintly. He knew. He always said he could feel it. They stood in silence for a moment. The air was still, and somewhere in the distance the faint sound of birds filled the quiet. The guard felt a strange mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness because he would never see the old man again, and gratitude because he had been part of his final memories. The young woman thanked him and turned to leave. But before she walked away, she said, "He wanted to be remembered near this place. His favorite bench under the tree. That's where we spread his ashes." The guard looked toward the bench again. It stood there just as it always had, but now it felt different, as if it carried a quiet presence. He could almost imagine the old man sitting there smiling, cane resting by his side. That evening, after the building emptied and the street grew quiet, the guard walked over to the garden. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. He sat down on the bench, the same one where the old man had spent so many mornings. For the first time, he noticed the small metal plaque placed at the side of the bench. It read, "In loving memory of a kind soul who found peace here." The guard ran his fingers over the words, feeling a deep ache in his heart. He sat there for a long time, thinking about all the mornings they had shared, all the small exchanges that had seemed so simple then but now felt so profound. He realized how often people underestimate the power of small gestures. A smile, a greeting, a cup of tea. None of them cost anything, yet they could mean the world to someone. The old man had taught him that without ever trying. When it was time to lock up, the guard stood and looked once more at the bench. "Rest easy, old man," he whispered softly. "You'll be missed." As he walked back toward the gate, he noticed a single flower had fallen from the tree above, landing gently on the bench. The wind rustled through the leaves, and for a brief moment the guard felt something, like the quiet echo of a familiar smile. And though the old man was gone, his presence remained in the stillness in the garden, and in the heart of the man who once thought a small act was nothing more than routine. After the young woman left that day, the guard stood near the gate for a long time, lost in thought. The noise of the city carried on around him, but inside, everything felt still. He kept replaying her words in his mind, about the old man, about his wife, about how his small kindness had meant something real. It was hard to believe that something so ordinary had touched another person's heart so deeply. For years he had thought of his job as just a routine, a duty, but now it felt different. That evening, after finishing his shift, he didn't go straight home. Instead, he walked back to the garden. The bench under the tree looked quiet, the same place where the old man had spent so many mornings. The light from the street lamps fell softly across the ground, and the air carried a faint scent of flowers. He sat down slowly, his mind full of memories, the sound of the old man's laugh, the gentle way he spoke, the gratitude in his eyes. He remembered how often people rushed past without noticing either of them, the guard at his post and the old man on the bench. They had been invisible to the world, two quiet souls who had found company in simple gestures. The guard smiled faintly to himself, realizing that sometimes the people we think we're helping are actually helping us too. Over the next few days, things at work went back to normal on the surface. The same faces passed through the gate, the same greetings were exchanged. But inside, the guard felt changed. He started noticing people more, not just their faces, but their moods, their tired eyes, their small smiles. He realized how easy, It was to walk past someone without knowing what they were carrying inside. One morning, an office worker who usually hurried past stopped to thank him for always holding the door open. Another day, a delivery man offered him a cup of coffee as he passed by. It was as if the kindness he had shared with the old man had quietly started to spread like ripples in still water. Still, every time he looked toward the garden, a part of him felt a soft ache. He missed that familiar figure, that calm nod that had once been part of his mornings. One afternoon, when the sun was warm and the air was filled with the sound of birds, he walked over to the bench again. He sat there quietly, imagining the old man sitting beside him talking softly about his memories. He remembered how the old man once said, "This place makes me feel close to her." Now that he knew who her was, the man's late wife, those words carried even more weight. The guard looked up at the branches above, the sunlight filtering through them, and whispered, "You kept your promise, old man. You never stopped visiting her." The next morning, the guard decided to bring something with him. He stopped by a small flower shop on his way to work and bought a single white rose. When he reached the building, he placed it gently on the bench under the tree. It wasn't much, but it felt right. A small sign of respect for a man who had taught him the value of kindness without ever meaning to. For a moment he stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the petals move gently in the breeze. A few people walking by paused to look. One of them, a young woman who worked in the office, asked softly, "Who's the flower for?" The guard smiled and said, "For a friend. Someone who used to sit here." The woman nodded thoughtfully, and after a short pause she added, "That's nice. Not many people remember like that anymore." Her words stayed with him. The old man might have been gone, but his memory was still alive in small ways. In the quiet corner of the garden, in the way people now smiled more as they entered, and in the way the guard treated everyone with just a little extra warmth. A week later, the young woman and the old man's granddaughter returned. This time she brought a small bouquet of flowers. She thanked the guard again for what he had done and told him how her family had watched the video from her grandfather's phone. It was a short clip he had recorded months before he passed away. In it, he sat on the bench smiling faintly and said, "There's a kind man who watches the gate every day. He doesn't know how much his small kindness means to me. People like him make this world a softer place." The guard felt tears well up in his eyes as she showed him the video. It was strange hearing the old man's voice again, calm, gentle, and full of gratitude. He didn't know that someone had been thinking of him that way. He had never sought praise or recognition, yet here it was, proof that even the smallest act could leave a lasting mark on another person's life. "Your kindness gave him peace," the woman said softly. "He felt seen. You reminded him that life still had good people in it." The guard took a deep breath, his voice quiet when he replied, "He gave me something too. He reminded me why being kind matters." They stood in silence for a moment, both looking at the tree where the old man's ashes had been spread. The leaves swayed gently above, catching the light, and for a second, it felt like the world itself was listening. After she left, the guard found himself thinking deeply about what it all meant. He realized how many people go through life thinking their actions don't matter, that small gestures get lost in the noise of the world. But they do matter, maybe not in big, dramatic ways, but in quiet ones. A smile, a helping hand, a warm word. They can become memories that outlive us. From that day forward, the guard changed in small but noticeable ways. He greeted everyone with genuine warmth. He started keeping a few extra bottles of water near his post for delivery drivers on hot days. When he saw someone struggling with a heavy bag, he stepped forward to help without hesitation. None of these things took much effort, but they made a difference. People began to notice. Some started stopping by the gate just to chat for a moment. Others would wave as they walked past. The atmosphere around the building began to shift. It felt lighter, kinder, more human. The guard didn't talk much about the old man, but every kind thing he did felt like a quiet tribute to him. One afternoon, a small group of office workers gathered near the bench and planted a few flowers around it. They placed a small wooden sign that said, "In memory of a friend who reminded us of kindness." When the guard saw it, his eyes filled with tears. He hadn't asked them to do it, they had done it on their own. The old man's spirit had somehow inspired more people than he ever knew. As the seasons began to change, the garden continued to bloom. Birds often perched on the branches above the bench, and sometimes the guard would find someone sitting there quietly, lost in thought. Each time he would smile, knowing that the old man's favorite place was still bringing peace to others. There were moments when he still missed him. The familiar nod, the slow steps, the kind eyes. But now, that sadness carried something gentle with it. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was gratitude. He realized that life often connects people in unexpected ways. Sometimes we meet someone for a short while, and their presence stays with us long after they're gone. The old man had been one of those people. That evening, as the guard closed the gate, he looked toward the bench once more. The setting sun painted the sky in soft shades of gold and orange. A warm breeze passed through the trees, and for a brief moment, he thought he could hear the faint sound of the old man's laughter carried by the wind. He smiled to himself and whispered, "I'll keep doing my part, old friend. I'll keep it going." And in that quiet, peaceful moment, he understood something deeply, that kindness never really disappears. It lives on, passed from one person to another, like a small flame that refuses to go out. The guard had thought his gestures were small, but now he knew. Even the smallest light can brighten someone's darkest day. Months passed after the young woman's last visit. Life at the building slowly fell into its usual rhythm again. Yet something deep inside the guard had changed for good. Every morning when he arrived at work, he looked toward the garden first before taking his place by the gate. The bench under the old tree still stood there, surrounded by the flowers people had planted. It had become more than a seat now. It was a reminder of how kindness could outlive the person who inspired it. One morning, as he was sweeping near the gate, a little boy came running toward him, clutching a drawing in his hand. The boy's mother, one of the office workers, followed behind with an apologetic smile. The child handed the guard the drawing proudly. It showed a stick figure in a blue uniform standing next to a big tree, with a smiling old man sitting on a bench nearby. Above it, the boy had written in crooked letters, "Good people never go away." The guard stared at it for a moment, touched beyond words. He bent down, smiled, and said softly, "That's beautiful. Thank you." The boy grinned and ran back to his mother, leaving the guard with a lump in his throat. He pinned the drawing near his small desk by the gate where he could see it every day. People came and went. New faces replaced the old, but the guard's quiet warmth stayed the same. Some of the new employees had never met the old man, but they knew his story from the others. Sometimes they asked the guard about him, and he would tell them a few short stories. How the man always greeted everyone, how he never complained even when his legs hurt, how his smile could soften anyone's day. One day, while taking his lunch break, the guard noticed an elderly woman sitting on the bench alone. She looked lost, her hands trembling slightly as she held a folded piece of paper. The guard approached her gently and asked, "Are you okay, ma'am?" She looked up, startled at first, then nodded. "I was just remembering someone," she said quietly. He sat on the edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance. "This place holds many memories," he said. "You can take your time." The woman smiled faintly and looked around. "My husband used to bring me to a garden like this. He passed away last year. When I saw this bench, something made me sit here. I don't know why." The guard looked toward the flowers around the bench, and something inside him felt peaceful. "Maybe you were meant to," he said softly. "Sometimes the heart takes us where we need to be." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind moving through the trees. Before she left, the woman thanked him and said, "You have a kind soul. It shows in how you talk." After she walked away, the guard smiled to himself. It felt like the old man's spirit was still working quietly, guiding people who needed comfort to that same spot. Weeks later, the building manager called the guard into his office. For a moment, he thought he might be in trouble, but the manager smiled and handed him an envelope. "This is for you," he said. "Some of the tenants wanted to thank you for always being so kind and dependable." Inside was a small note and a gift card. The note read, "Your kindness makes this place feel like home. Thank you for being who you are." The guard felt humbled. He didn't do any of this expecting anything in return. All he ever wanted was to make people's days a little easier, a little brighter. But seeing how much people noticed touched him deeply. That evening, as he left work, he stopped again at the bench. The light was fading and the air was cool. He placed another white rose there like he always did. "You were right, old friend," he whispered. "Kindness doesn't stop with one person." Over the following months, the bench became a small symbol of comfort for many people. Some came there to eat lunch, others just to sit quietly after a hard day. The guard often saw people leaving small things behind, a flower, a note, even a cup of tea. Each gesture carried warmth, like unseen hands passing kindness forward. One rainy morning, a stranger arrived at the gate. He was in his late 50s, wearing a worn jacket and carrying a camera. "Are you the guard who used to talk to an old man here?" he asked. The guard nodded, a little surprised. The man smiled sadly. "That was my father," he said. "My sister told me about you. I've been living abroad, but she sent me that video he recorded before he passed. I just wanted to meet you and say thank you." The guard didn't know what to say at first. The man continued, "My father was lonely after my mother died. We worried about him, but he always told us about a kind guard who greeted him every day. He said it gave him a reason to keep going. You might think what you did was small, but it wasn't." The guard felt his eyes sting with tears. He took a deep breath and said quietly, "Your father was a good man. I learned a lot from him too." They both stood there for a moment looking toward the tree. The man took out his camera and said, "Would you mind if I took a photo here? I want to keep this memory." "Of course," the guard said. The man took a few pictures, one of the bench, one of the flowers, and one of the guards standing beside the gate. Then he said, "I'm going to print these and send one to you. You deserve to be remembered too." After he left, the guard stood still for a long while, listening to the rain. He realized that life had a quiet way of connecting people, even across distances and years. The kindness he once gave had come back to him in ways he could never have imagined. As time went on, the guard grew older, but he never lost his gentle spirit. Even when his hair turned gray and his steps slowed, his smile stayed the same. He had become something of a legend around the building. The man who always had a kind word, who always remembered people's names, who made everyone feel seen. One summer evening, as the sun was setting, a new young guard came to start his first day on the job. The old guard showed him around, explaining everything patiently. When they reached the garden, he stopped and pointed at the bench. "That spot," he said softly, "means something special. A good man used to sit there. He taught me that kindness doesn't cost a thing but can mean everything." The young guard listened carefully and nodded. "I'll remember that," he said. Before leaving that day, the old guard placed one last white rose on the bench. He didn't say anything this time. He just stood quietly for a while, then turned and walked away, the evening breeze brushing against his face. Days later, people noticed the young guard had continued the same habit. Every few mornings, there would be a fresh flower on the bench. No one had asked him to do it. He simply understood what it stood for, a reminder that a little kindness could outlive the person who started it. The garden remained a peaceful place, filled with laughter, quiet conversations, and the soft rustling of leaves. Sometimes people still spoke of the old man and the guard, two ordinary souls who had met by chance but changed each other's lives. And though time kept moving, something of their bond remained, in every smile shared, every kind gesture, every moment someone paused to help another. The world outside was busy and fast, but inside that small corner near the gate, kindness still bloomed quietly, just like it always had. The old guard's story became a whisper passed down through the years, not as a tale of fame or glory, but as a simple truth about humanity. That even the smallest acts, when done with sincerity, could become someone's light in a dark moment. In the end, the guard never saw himself as a hero. He was just a man doing his job, trying to make each day a little better. But in doing so, he had built something far greater, a legacy of kindness that would keep living in others long after he was gone. And somewhere in the soft rustle of the garden leaves, if you listened closely, it almost felt like the old man was still there, smiling with quiet pride.